Welcome back to the SAC Baseball Podcast, episode 2 of our second season, the 2023 college baseball season. I'm here with Eric, the only other acquaintance that could make it today. Eric, first weekend back with baseball 2023. How did it feel?
It felt incredible. Saturday, went to baseball practice with the team I coach, came back, got home around noon, turned on ESPN Plus, and just had baseball all day. It was amazing.
Yeah, I wish ESPN would have had, or ESPN Plus would have had a few more games available, but in a word, it felt right to
It
be
would it
able
would have been
to.
cool to watch, the college baseball showdown. That'd have been fun.
Yeah, there. I mean, there. That was probably some of the best baseball. Well, actually, one of the best series we could talk about in a little bit, I think, was on ESPN Plus. There was a really incredible series out on the West Coast there that was
I
available
think I
for
know which
viewing.
one you're talking
I'm
about.
sure. I'm sure you do. But yeah, I mean, what a great start to the baseball season. Whether you primarily follow Major League Baseball or collegiate baseball, it just felt right to hear the pop of the mitt and the ping of the bat.
Yeah.
It was
And
awesome.
it didn't start off as hectic as last season did. We last season we saw a couple upsets in the first week, and like
That's
we
true.
saw, I said it last week and posted to our Twitter. We're doing the mayhem rankings where you beat a team in a series, you take their rank if they're in the top 25. Doesn't include tournament play, so you can lose tournament games and keep your spot. But there was zero change in any of the top 25 rankings. Every team won or was playing in the tournament.
Though there was some like teams in danger though. Like the
There
Friday there
was
was
some
several upsets.
there was a West Coast West Coast series that almost had our only one.
That one, a couple teams, I think UNC and Miami both dropped their openers, came back to win their series though. But
Yeah,
I'll tell you, my weekend, I watched a lot of baseball on Friday. I feel like the last several days have been a blur for me personally. We've been unpacking our entire life basically. And
it does. I got a box. I got three boxes in the corner still, and I've been here for a month, so it
yeah,
never stops.
my beautiful, wonderful wife she's very type A, like loves to be organized. And so it was a sprint and not a marathon. So I think we're pretty much done. But the last like 4 or 5 days have been a blur. But
I'm in the same boat. This is the only room because it's my room that's not unpacked.
I, I know the feeling. I
Every
know
other room
the
is done, already decorated. It's like, are you going to organize your office? It bothers me. You don't come in here. The only time I'm in here is the homework and pod. What do you mean? What do you mean it bothers you?
some things never change. But I will say, so I had a friend come in from out of town. He was in my wedding. He lives up in Columbus. Went to Ohio State, was in town visiting some family, and we went out to the NC State game on Sunday. They, wasn't exactly high stakes baseball. They were going for the sweep of Wagner. But I will say, the highlight from that game, they played a close game. Wagner was keeping it close to the first 3 innings or so, and in the fifth of the sixth inning, NC State had scored a couple runs. It was like 3 or 4 to 0. And then beautiful field, by the way. They have a really awesome backdrop, like all the
Hmm.
trees in the right field. I could see where Tommy Tanks hit all his home runs to
See the
the right
trees he was
center.
chopping down in the
Yeah.
outfield.
But so they bring on up in the booth, they say guest announcer, like 9-year-old kid, blank, I can't remember his name, but they put up on the board like uh interesting fact about this kid, can fit 32 grapes in his mouth. And the whole crowd's like, okay, like, all right, he's got some talent there. And then he announces the first player of the inning. Player gets hit by pitch immediately. Announces the second player, home run, like first pitch home run. Third batter comes up, back to back jacks, and the NC State hadn't hit, like they were middling singles, the entire game. So the crowd was going wild for this like 9-year-old that
Keep
ended
that
up
kid in
having.
the booth.
Exactly. He ended up staying like for a half hour for an inning because it just went on and on. We were like, that 9-year-old has got to be going crazy right now with his attention
Yeah.
span.
You brought up Tommy Tanks. His injury.
Mm.
I don't. I. They're not to he got out early in the game, but they had him in the first game and they hit out of the world. And then game 2 and 3, they were still hitting, but not as good. So do you think not having the threat of Tommy Tanks in the lineup is kind of like if the Yankees take Judge out, you can kind of pitch to guys more aggressively than you would because you don't have to pitch around somebody?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a great place to start. LSU, obviously, the number one overall team. We talked a lot about them in our opening episode, especially about their transfer acquisitions. And Tommy Tanks was at the front of that conversation. I hated to see him go out. LSU, I wouldn't say they're clearly not in trouble without him, right?
Not in trouble, but
They swept Western Michigan handily, but you know, anyone would be lying if you said it's a different lineup without that kind of a hitter, right? It shortens the lineup that much more. Not that LSU's in want of, elite baseball talent, but of course, right, with that kind of threat, as a pitcher, who you're facing. Who, if it's a, JUCO transfer hitting an eighth now, or versus, Tommy White,
yeah,
that's led the NCAA. And did he lead in home runs last year? I can't recall, but
for a while. I don't think he did at the end of the season, but he did it for a good
yeah,
part. I know he did the first weekend for sure.
yeah. But talking about LSU and their transfers, right? That one of my favorite,
Paul
like,
Skenes.
oh my god, like the first moments from Friday, pulling up the first clips and seeing him just absolutely carve through, the first inning against Western Michigan, and then my favorite part, at least seeing from his start, was the end. Did you see some of the numbers on how he finished his start?
I watched a little bit of that game. The Texas Tech game was on at the same time, so I watched more of that one.
Hey, they
But
had a good weekend
he
too.
was. It scared me because they don't come off in the first couple innings hot. They were fighting back like the first 2-3 games. So it was kind of a stressor for 5 to 7 innings most of the time, especially today with the walk off bases loaded walk.
Yeah. But as far as skiing goes, so the one of my, we're not doing any like numbers, segments like last year, but they left him in for 98 pitches. I think it was 99 actually, which is a little
No,
bit.
I know his 98th pitch was 98 miles an
Yeah,
hour.
exactly, which is wild. So, that's kind of a conversation in and of itself, whether or not your Friday night guy should be in at 98 pitches against Western Michigan on opening day.
Well, I think that comes down to, as a pitcher, if I got a good workup going into the season, I should come into opening day ready to throw those pitches versus if I kind of started later in the year, that's when you kind of have a 70 to 75 pitch cap, maybe throwing 5 innings.
No doubt. And you, as a head coach and as a teammate, right, you want to be that bulldog that takes the ball until you have the ball taken from you.
Yeah.
So, and I thought I saw one tweet that somebody said, like, Paul Skenes came from, he was getting ready for fucking deployment. He can throw 98 pitches.
So speaking of the miles per hour, here's a good conversation that we had on Twitter, or that I saw on Twitter. This guy posted a question that said, will Paul Skenes throw over 100 miles an hour? And yes, 99.5 rounds up. And somebody said 89.5, you can round up to 90, but you can't round up to 100. You have to hit 100 to throw that. How do you feel about that as a pitcher?
That's true. I mean, I think that's true. Like you don't want to be, I think leading up to that. Now this was never a milestone that I came anywhere close to sniffing, but I wouldn't want to know, like, yeah, it was 99.6. Like, don't call it. Obviously, it's going to flash 100 on the gun, but you know. Hey, you're muted.
That's like saying you hit 397, but really it was you hit
You had
397, it's 400.
400. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So LSU definitely, one of the teams that I would classify them as a team that just took care of business this weekend. They came in heavily favored. Didn't wow with anything other than maybe some individual performances, obviously from Skenes.
Dylan
But
Cruz's cleats.
yeah, those were pretty fire. What did he have? What was he wearing on the old
It was
feet?
I think it was the Nike Vapors, like the low tops, and it was all SpongeBob theme with a gold outline Nike swoosh.
I'm Runny.
which as a big SpongeBob fan growing up, seeing some Patrick cleats was pretty cool.
Stellar impression right there. Teams, in addition to LSU, that we would say kind of just took care of business. Texas A&M swept Seattle. These, and again, we're putting these as taking care of business because they played kind of, teams that they were
Yeah.
expected to kind of
I
steamroll
think
over.
I think outside of the Desert Invitational and the College Baseball Showdown, it was kind of
Not a lot
teams
of
should be going
premier.
3-0, winning series handedly, maybe dropping one in a close game. I don't think anyone was blown out by a, a team that they shouldn't be getting blown out by.
Yeah. A&M swept Seattle. ECU swept George Washington. Florida looked really good, actually. Really good pitching from them, which is what they lacked last year. A couple of ACC teams, NC State, we mentioned. Louisville took care of business.
An
Oregon
ACC
actually.
team that had some good pitching, the old Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets.
Oh my God! As a Well, okay, I should say I'm repping my Jackets jersey purely in honor of Jake DeLoe, which he won. There's a couple of different National Players of the Week awards, but he was one of the recipients from one of the various organizations. Had a great series against Miami, not Miami, Florida, Miami, Ohio. But pulling up the weekend scores, it was quite disheartening. They got out to a 9-run first inning lead, and again, we don't need to really talk about Georgia Tech because they are not in the national conversation right now. But from last year, like the team is always going to hit. They just never have any pitching. And lo and behold, they ended up winning that game 15-12. I think they won the first 2 games by like a combined 3 runs. So
Yeah,
just not good. Not good. Ole
a
Miss
team.
kind of just stomped on Delaware. Oregon got a 4-game sweep as Xavier, which is interesting. Um, Eric, you wanted to chime in here with with a team here?
Oh, I was just gonna say, Wake Forest. We all
Yeah.
we all know having Nick Kurtz and Adam. I don't know if I think it's Sasir. They share the home run lead with 4 each. Hit 13 home runs on the weekend. But not only did they dominate at the plate through 34 innings, they averaged I think it was 1.7 strikeouts an inning with 60 Ks over 34 innings.
Yeah.
That's
I
just
mean,
that's just nutty to average that.
it's crazy because I think the ACC, they won ACC Pitcher of the Week, not Wake
They
Forest, but
did.
the ACC recipient was like a relief pitcher that came in and just shoved. I think him and Louder combined for like 20 Ks the two of them pitched. But that I would say Wake Forest is the first team on the list of teams that can say like the biggest winners of the weekend. Again, they played 2 teams that are not like great teams. Illinois, I think, was one of them. They're Power 5 team, and then Youngstown State from Ohio. So nothing crazy there, but the way in which they dominated that series was impressive, both on the offensive and defensive sides. You mentioned.
Yeah, and I think another team that kind of stole the weekend was South Carolina. So they share the home run lead with Wake Forest, but Wake Forest hit in 4 games. South Carolina hit 13 in 3 games. So currently they're on pace to hit 241 home runs, on the season. But they also had some not elite pitching, but elite defense because they only had 29 strikeouts compared to 60 from Wake Forest. But the opponents were only hitting 132. So they were hitting the ball right at people or making good defensive plays. So that's kind of like what I think I forgot what team I talked about it with. But if you can make the plays without getting the strikeouts, keep batting averages low, that's what's going to win you games because the bats won't always be there, but pitching will.
Yeah.
The pitching and defense is more consistent than hitting 4.3 homers a game.
Everybody will regress to the mean on offense.
Yeah.
One of the biggest winners, I think, from the weekend was a team in Texas, the Horned Frogs. I think they
Putting
generated some of the more viral moments of the weekend.
I think that was also in part in playing in Globe Life and arguably the biggest opening weekend we've seen in a while.
Definitely. But at the same time, they opened up with a 3-game series against Vanderbilt, Arkansas, and Mizzou.
Who I think might actually be crowned the winner of that tournament.
Ooh,
They came
Mizzou.
in as Mizzou. They came in as, if you were to rank those teams, the 6th seed would have been the 10th seed if you could rank them lower out of the 6 teams. I don't think anyone. I think most expectations were maybe squeak out one close game and they go 2-1. I think they're kind of the winners of
Yeah, I
that
mean,
series.
they definitely, especially TCU coming in and really dominating Vanderbilt game one, and then taking it to Arkansas game two, right? Not a lot of people, TCU was ranked and they have a very old, very talented lineup, but people weren't projecting them to beat those two teams to the extent they did. They did drop their last game against Mizzou, and I think that's really the only flaw we saw from TCU, though, right? Like they had an offense that raked the first 2 games, starting pitching that stifled Arkansas and Vanderbilt. And they had a 4-run lead in that Missouri game, but they unfortunately blew it with the bullpen. So, really, you know, we'll talk a little bit more about those, at least one of those teams. But yeah, TCU really looks strong this weekend.
Yeah, and then Stanford. I fully expected them to sweep Cal State Fullerton, and Cal State took a surprising game one. I got to watch when I was awake. I fell asleep by like the 6th inning because West Coast games will start to like 10 o'clock out here. But Stanford just looked flat at the plate. Pitching wasn't there. And then they kind of picked it up game two and then had an explosive last like 2, 3 innings. I think they put up what 9 or 10 runs in extras. So
Yeah,
that
the
was a surprise series for me.
the last game was absolutely nuts. Luckily, I got to catch the end of that one. I think that's a good transition. If you don't mind, I've come up with kind of a list of statements, and I want to see if you think they're overreactions or if you think they're realistic, statements. And the first one, it's more of a question. What is that series? Does that series say more about Cal State Fullerton or Stanford? We have seen Cal State Fullerton really decline in recent years from a perennial college baseball powerhouse, one of the more storied, programs in the nation. And then Stanford, on the rise, Omaha team last year, returning a lot of starters, came in and almost dropped that series. What do you think? Who does that say more about?
If this wasn't opening week, I would say Cal State. But like you said, 5, 10 minutes ago, most every team's going to regress towards their average more so than they're going to keep the pace they're at. So I expect Stanford to kind of figure it out, have that same pitching they had last year, pick up the bats a little bit. I mean, last year they weren't a very big offensive team. They won games with pitching. So I think not seeing that in game one, but seeing the bats be able to explode, I think Stanford will be just fine. Um, how long it takes them to get to being fine is going to kind of determine, if it takes them 3 to 4 weeks, they might not be in the conversation in a month or so. But if, they can figure their stuff out through this weekday game they got coming up and then get back to the Stanford we expect next week, I think they'll be fine. Cal State, I don't think they'll reach Southern Miss mid-major type team, but I think they could be, top 30, top 40 team if
Yeah,
they continue the play or, even if they regress a little bit, being able to hit even if it wasn't their elite stuff, but good Stanford pitching. I think Cal
yeah.
State could be a team to mess with.
And I think you can argue that they did hit some of their elite stuff. I mean, one of my lasting, I think, memories from this first weekend is watching that third game in extras, watching Stanford storm and take the lead in the top of the ninth inning, I think in game three, where Braden Montgomery had that 3-run double. And then I just was, licking my chops a little bit, seeing him come in for the save. Like they brought in a relief pitcher. I think he had a 4-pitch walk and then immediately brought Montgomery in. And he was just throwing BBs up there until I can't remember now. I feel bad, but the Cal State Fullerton right-handed batter just turned on a fastball like a few inches, away from his hands, and just absolutely hit the shit out of it over the facilities there. That game was crazy. But to your point, I think it says a lot about the quality of both teams, where they were in dog fights for two of those games. I think two of them were walk-offs, like ninth inning type games where you're going back and forth. You're depending on your like people in the lineup to like next man up type mentality when there's no option other than continuing the inning. And I think that says a lot, especially in the first weekend of the season, setting that tone as far as competition is concerned.
Yeah, I think from a fan's perspective, if you're a Cal State Fullerton fan, you're looking at it going, we should have won those games. We didn't win those games. Our team's not as good. But then you look at it from like a coach's perspective, and he's going, we were down how many runs in the ninth inning against Stanford and one of their best pitchers, and we came back and tied it. Like we put ourselves in positions to win games against elite teams. So I think from a coach's perspective, if I'm the coach of Cal State, I'm happy with the weekend, even though we go 1-2, because we took elite pitching, came back on it, and put ourselves in position to win games with our
Yeah.
backs against the wall, not in the fifth or sixth inning when we have some time to play with.
Yeah, missed opportunity, but you're happy with the performance and how it sets up for the next week or two.
Now, my
Um,
my my closing end of the bullpen, I might be a little worried about, but
for sure. um, One of the teams we've talked about, especially as it pertains to their two kind of star hitters and some of their pitching, is Wake Forest. Tell me if this is an overreact. Wake Forest is a bona fide, after seeing them, a bona fide ACC favorite and super regional host.
I think coming into the season, I would have picked them in the ACC by a slim margin. I think it would have been, a close bet between like them, Georgia Tech, maybe Clemson if they can stay hot. Like if they
Yeah,
don't do what they did last season, where they stay hot and then die off halfway through the season. But after this week, Wake Forest, I think in 100% of people's minds, without a doubt, should be a top 5 team the rest of the season, which I
yeah.
don't see another ACC team cracking that.
That's when I was thinking about this. I think my initial reaction is to like kind of back off a little bit and say, that might be an overreaction. But when you look at the rest of the ACC, right? You mentioned Georgia Tech, Clemson. Um, there, but the ones that have started hot or started ranked this season are Virginia Tech, NC State, Louisville. They all played just fine and will no doubt, prove to be challenging opponents in the ACC. But
Well, the only team I think that could compete with them, I don't know how I forgot this. I'm literally wearing their jacket. Virginia, who put up like 60 runs this weekend.
yeah,
Now,
they
granted,
almost
they decided to beat up on some military boys because, like one of our Twitter followers said, "Well, guess UVA just hates the troops."
yeah, hates the troops confirmed.
I think they are the only team. If you were to base it solely off of the first 3 to 4 games, Wake Forest, you put them in a 3-game series against Virginia in a regional or in the ACC tournament, put them in a 3-game series. I think Wake Forest wins it 2-1.
Yeah, and I think that's a great hypothetical, considering Virginia they really did dominate Navy, and you feel bad a little bit since they are.
And the other, every other team they played this weekend. Who else? I forgot who they played. I
Oh,
should have
I
wrote
thought
it
it
down.
was
I didn't
just
write this stuff down.
But as wrapping up the thoughts about Wake Forest, I want to say my first reaction is to say overreaction, but when you look at the ACC and you look at what Wake Forest did on the bump and at the plate this weekend, I think it's tough to say that they're not, justified in being the ACC favorite with Louder. It was even Louder didn't even start Friday. It was Seth Keener, I think was his name.
Well, I
Can't
I
remember.
think if you take Wake Forest and put them, if Wake Forest was an SEC team, we would be talking about putting Wake Forest over LSU. I think because they
Ooh.
both played similar caliber teams in their opening weekend. And if you look at the stats, Wake Forest outperforms LSU. So I think
That's fair.
if they were in the same conference, we're instead of saying Wake Forest is a top five team, we'd be making a case for is Wake Forest the number one team right now.
That's
But they're in the
fair.
ACC, which is much weaker than the SEC. So people are gonna, by people I mean us and pretty much everybody else is gonna say, let's keep LSU at number one for now.
Fair enough. Um, Speaking of conferences, speaking of one last note on the ACC. There was an ACC team there are a couple actually that made it to Omaha last year and has now been completely irrelevant so far this first week of baseball. That team is Notre Dame. They were up and down a lot this season, or last season rather. Opened their season this year with a series loss to Lipscomb. Your statement is Notre Dame will not make the NCAA tournament this year. Overreaction or realistic?
I think that's a little bit of an overreaction because I think most of the season, I'd say 50% of the season, we were going back and forth between is Notre Dame an elite team and is Notre Dame, out of the top 50 type team. So I think it's an overreaction to week one. I think if the next 2 to 3 weeks go the same way, then we start talking about they're not even going to make the tournament.
Fair enough. I personally think it's actually pretty realistic. Only now, again, this is weekend one. It's really not appropriate to make like season long predictions based on one, weekend series worth of play. However, they just lost their head coach. Shit.
To LSU.
No.
Was it
To
LSU? No.
it was Florida. It was Link Jarrett went
Yeah.
to
Yeah. Florida State.
yeah, Florida State. What did it? Sorry, I thought you said Louisiana State. My bad. My bad.
I did.
Okay. Yeah. So losing their head coach, I think they graduated their top pitcher from last year. Yeah, I think nobody talked about them this weekend because of how bad they were, and that's kind of surprising given that the fact that they were a super regional team last year.
I mean,
Um,
coaching has a lot to do with it. And I wouldn't have said that a year and a half ago before I started coaching. And then, as a player, you look around and you're like, we got some studs here. We can win some games. But there's more to it than just because, the shortstop might be making some of the calls out there. The catcher might be calling some of the plays. But the mastermind behind everything that goes on is the coach. So
yeah.
I think that's a bigger loss than, Texas losing a whole bunch of starters.
Well, speaking of teams that lost this weekend, I think I'll be interested to see if you have a different answer, but I think there was one clear team that was one of the biggest losers of the weekend. Well, yeah, well they just straight up just got pooped on, but
They didn't win, so they were the biggest loser this week.
Yeah, Texas is not back. They are back to losing, but I was actually thinking of a different T team. I was thinking of Tennessee. I don't know if you saw their play this weekend.
I the only game I watched this weekend was the Grand Canyon game.
Yeah. And I say biggest losers not because they looked like a horrible team or anything, but for a number two team coming in, dropping two games in a 3-game kind of series like that, they definitely didn't live up to expectations as a number two team. That's all I'm trying to say. So here, one more statement for you. I got one or two more actually. So Tennessee's biggest problem we talked about this past episode, we talked about the fact that they lost a bunch of their hitters, particularly the outfielders, but they returned a great core of starting pitching. They ended up losing, I think, 3-4 to Grand Canyon in what was a great game, by the way. It was a really fantastic game. Lost to Arizona 3-1, I believe, on Friday, which was opening day, and they did bounce back to beat somebody 7-0. I think it was, I can't remember now who it was that they beat, but my statement is Tennessee doesn't have the offensive firepower to compete for a super regional hosting spot this year.
I'm interested to see what they look like when they get Maui Ahuna.
Yep, that was a
Because
huge story. Something I don't understand why he wasn't able to play.
it was UC San Diego they beat.
Thank you.
So UC San Diego being probably the worst of the three teams is the only one they beat. I think the pitching is still there because, like, you look at the numbers, they only gave up four, what, 7 runs the
No
whole
doubt.
weekend, which any team over 3 games would love to only give up 7 runs. But it is the loss of what I would say was probably the heart and soul of the vibe of that team in Trey Lipscomb and Jordan Beck, Mike, aka Mike Honcho. I
Yeah,
think that
I didn't
is
see the fur coat, the mink coat making a
no, they
reappearance.
brought it out. They brought it out after who was it? I think Clark belted one when they went up on Grand Canyon. They just got to keep it in the dugout this year because people were getting mad about it. But I do think the Tennessee number 2 ranking is fair for the name Tennessee Volunteers baseball. But for the team that they have this year, I think it put a very high expectation on a team that isn't even close to the same team they had last year. So I think it was a little bit unfair to put them at number 2 because of the team they have. Because, like, you can't expect to follow up a season where you have less than 10 losses. And
Yeah,
like the last season was just a season you can't take that into account when ranking them because it was such an outlier of a season. So I think Tennessee is going to probably settle into that 20 to 10, 10 to 20 ranking most of the season. I don't think they'll host this year just because they are in the SEC, but I think they'll settle in. They'll probably, if I had to guess, I'd say 33 plus wins. Should probably put them second or third, depending on how they do in conference play in the SEC.
yeah. I think it's a bit of an overreaction for now, only because we both know that hitting can come later, right? You had a great point mentioning that their projected starting shortstop didn't even get to play this series or this weekend, which was ridiculous. But so you made a great point. The pitching was there, right? Like they held Arizona to 3 runs, they held Grand Canyon to 4 runs, and those are two teams that are not like those are two very high quality teams. Arizona is a perennial, the contender in the Pac-12. Grand Canyon is one of the best mid majors in the country. Like,
Yeah, and, and it
yeah,
and it wasn't like Grand Canyon. Like, honestly, outside of there's 2 plays in that game that I think won Grand Canyon that game. It was the bunt that got overthrown to first that scored, what was it, 2 to tie. It was either 2 to tie or they took the lead, and then I don't know if it was the coach that told him to round second or if it was the player taking his own initiative,
yeah, and
but
then just
making the
got
third out on a hose piece from right field, like, that was, if he's safe at third in the first baseman makes the scoop, I think Tennessee's 2-1 on the weekend instead of dropping one to Grand Canyon.
yeah, that's a great point. And the pitching was there, the hitting can't come. So especially for a younger lineup, I think that one's a bit of an overreaction. A super regional hosting spot might still be a bit of a stretch, but they can still very well contend in the SEC if they can figure out their lineup and their
And
bats. Their
and they
pitching can
got
carry them.
they got some time before they got to pull it together for conference play. So they got, 3 weeks to figure it out, get the hitting going, figure out the swag that they're going to have this year compared to last year. So I'm not super worried about Tennessee, but I don't think there's a chance that they even come close to the team they were last year.
Yeah. All right, I've got one last one for you that I want to get your reaction on. So the Big Ten, it's a Power Five conference by like a name only, really more in football and basketball. um, their two top teams coming into the season were projected to be Maryland and Rutgers. So both of those teams, well, one of those teams won their series, though Maryland almost lost to UCF. They won 2-1, and the last game was only a few runs spread. And Rutgers dropped their opening series to Campbell. Granted, Campbell's a very good mid-major team. So my question for you, or my statement is, the Big Ten is going to be completely irrelevant this year in baseball. True or false?
I
Overreaction, under
I
or
think what's
realistic?
going to yeah, the only thing that's going to keep them relevant is the fact that they are one of the few conferences with automatic multi bids. I think that's the only thing that's going to keep them relevant. But I mean, like you said, UCF, they're not they're not one of those elite top 25, top 40 teams, but they can play when they play really good when they play good baseball, they're a really good team. And Campbell, they're they're just a mid-major juggernaut. And
Yeah.
they can beat any team in a series. I don't I think you put any team in the top 25 against Campbell, I think they pull out at least half those series.
Yeah, I think that's fair. They definitely will give a competitive series to any team in the country, and you saw that last year in the tournament. They lost Thomas Harrington from last year, but they were playing Tennessee and Georgia Tech very well in that Knoxville Super Regional.
I mean, I
So
know there were some Tennessee fans that were on the edge of their seat most
definitely,
of that regional.
yeah. So I'd say for that, I think that one's also a bit of an overreaction. The Big Ten as a whole is still going to be, a weaker baseball conference, but Maryland still won the series, and Rutgers is especially like northern schools are notorious for struggling a little bit at the beginning of the season, purely because they're not able to get on the field as much of the southern schools. You're hitting and hitting and hitting indoors, but you're not taking reps on the field. So I'll
Well,
give
that
Rutgers a
that
pass for
showed
now.
what was the first game Friday was a team from the north. I forget what teams it was. It was a team from the north playing a team from the south. The first out of the game was made on a pickoff move, and
Oh
even the
yeah.
announcers, he's like, "What do you expect from a team that can't get on the field until last week? Like you don't. That's not something you can really practice indoors unless you got a whole facility. And how many teams up here have that?
Yeah. Yeah, we'll give Rutgers a pass for now, just being a northern team. Did you mentioned when you were talking about Texas Tech earlier? I thought they were actually one of the underrated bigger winners from the weekend, purely because Gonzaga is they were a quality team last year. They ended up, I think, tailing off a little bit towards the middle and the end of the season, but they were at one time fighting for a top 25 spot. And Texas Tech, I want to quickly highlight the starting pitching, right? Like their Friday, Saturday, Sunday pitchers. I'll get their names here: Brendan Greiton, Mason Molina, and Bo Blessy. They went 17 innings.
Oh, and was it Kyle Robertson? Was their Friday starter? They had four starters because they did
Yeah,
a
they had a
Friday to
four-game
Monday series.
series. Yeah.
The Friday game they took a guy who was a reliever last year, and I think he had 24 appearances last year, and like almost 20 of those didn't give up a single run. And they're talking about him leading up into the game, and first pitch of the game, triple into the right center gap. And it immediately, as soon as it was hit, I went, "Oh, this is going to be a long season." And then, I have this note here for Southern Miss because like they didn't blow out any of their games this weekend either. But good teams win close games. So
Yeah.
I personally rank Texas Tech at 17. I think they were 24 last week. If they would have come out in the beginning of those games, I mentioned this earlier. They put themselves in holes early and had to fight back. You start playing teams like, you know, if Texas gets back to Texas of last year, you play teams like that, or you play other, TCU, you put yourself in a 3-run hole by the third inning, you're in a really bad spot. But against a lesser team, you can afford to kind of dig yourself into a hole enough to fight back. But it was a nerve wracking 4 games.
But to their credit, the last thing I'll note there, great note about Southern Miss. They looked like one of the more impressive teams the weekend. They swept Liberty, also a very good mid major team. But Tech's starting rotation over the weekend, uh, they went 17 innings and only gave up 3 hits and 0 runs. So
Mm.
definitely, as far as what do you need to contend in the postseason? Or like a starting rotation to that quality is pretty key.
What's going to be interesting for them is they don't have a lot of returning starters. They have a lot of guys that left. Most of their infield left. Uh, you know, Jace John got drafted.
Yep.
Um, I don't remember if Owen Washburn. I think he's the only one that's back. The only like big notable name. Kurt Wilson's not there anymore. The Texas Tech versus Texas hero.
Yeah.
So it'll
Never
be interesting to
forget that
see
one.
if their hitting can keep up with what they did last season. But I'm interested to see what they do this year.
Well, speaking of some players, do you want to talk about any individual players that stood out to you over the weekend as far as their personal or individual performance goes?
Yeah. So I started off making kind of a little bit of a list of a couple different players, and then I saw one player, and I thought to myself, there's not anyone that can compete with this guy. He's from southeastern Louisiana. His name is Tyler Fink. Okay. He had 6 walks and 3 hit by pitches. And this is in one series, one 4-game series. 6 walks, 3 hit by pitches. So 9 free passes to first base, 5 hits, 9 runs, 7 RBIs. The even crazier part about this, okay? Southeastern Louisiana as a team attempted 28 stolen bases and were safe on 24 of them. They went 24 for 28 on stolen bases. Tyler Fink by himself over 4 games went 7 for 7 on stolen bases. I
That's
don't think I don't think there's I don't think I would I didn't look it up, but I feel like there's teams. I would say out of the 299, 300 teams, there might be 4 teams that stole 7 bases collectively in their opening series. He stole 7 by himself out of the 24, almost a third of their stolen bases.
that
And
is
that
pretty
is
wild.
hands down my player of the week.
So I'm sorry, how many did you say they stole over the series?
As a team,
Yeah.
24 out of 28
Oh
successful
my
stolen base
god.
attempts.
That's like, now I never experienced this, but like as a fielder, just watching guys run like with
And
no
run.
opposition is just got to be killer. And I'm glad you brought this up. I actually wanted to quickly highlight. This is one of my favorite inning box scores that I saw from the weekend. UCLA was a team that just beat the ever living shit out of Omaha. And one specific inning, I noticed that they scored. Let's see, they went from 1 to 6 to 1 to 6, so 10 runs in the eighth inning here. I'm going to read to you how this went down. So, new pitcher comes in this inning, throws a ball, hits the batter steals second, walk, walk, hit by pitch, walk, new pitcher, single, foul out, walk, hit by pitch, single, 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 another new pitcher, walk, finally gets a fly out, single, and another fly out.
So it was just death by singles.
But I just like, that would just be so, imagine being one of the fielders
Demoralizing.
watching like just walk, 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 hit by pitch, hit by
That's the
pitch.
tough part because you know as a pitcher, like if I think my infield is going, why is this guy out here? Now I'm getting in my own head more than if I got a bunch of guys behind me going, let's go, man. Figure it out. Figure it out. Let's
It's
go.
like
Just play your
the
game.
classic coaching, like walks up to the kid in like high school, like, all right, come on, buddy, just throw strikes. He's like, I'm trying,
Yeah.
man. I'm giving it my best shot. You're just
Oh,
going everywhere.
I never thought about that. I'm glad you said that, coach.
uh, as far as other standouts go, there were some other definitely interesting players. I want to highlight a couple. There are a lot of obviously people that are just have absurd numbers, in the first series. So we won't go into all of those, but I do want to quickly return on Rhett Lauder from Wake Forest. One thing that I love, so he had 10 strikeouts in 5 innings, and the 5 innings he worked. But what's awesome is that he kind of started off a little rocky, but then settled in, struck out the side in his last 2 innings. So talk about finishing strong. You kind of love to see that. Our boy Nick Kurtz. So Kurtz, it hurts is what I'm going to put on the t-shirt there. We talked about his 4 homers. He's rocking a 2.14 OPS right now, which is just insane.
Nutty. We'll see what average that regresses to.
Yeah. One of the players that went viral this weekend, Texas State Chase Mora, he hit 3 home runs in his first 3 collegiate appearances as a pinch hitter too, or as a defensive substitution. So that's awesome to see. You get like to the college level, you're like, I'm playing D1. this is going to be a little bit different than high school. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not that bad. Um,
So bringing up Texas State real quick,
yeah,
I personally rank them at 25.
yeah.
Would you
They're one
put
of the
them in
teams.
your top 25?
They're one of the teams that a couple. I have two teams noted here that were teams that weren't ranked, generally speaking, that played like they wanted to be, and Texas State was one of them. Um, they just pooed on Northwestern. Granted,
They
again,
outscored them by 38 runs.
yeah, Northwestern not a baseball powerhouse, but at the same time, they are a Power Five school, right? More resources. Granted, Northern school versus Southern school again here, but yeah, they on Sunday they hit 8 home runs by 7 different players. So they played like with their pants on fire. They want to be ranked. I think they definitely have the argument to be ranked, especially with some of the pitching they featured. A couple other players quickly to highlight. Let's see here. Washington State. Nobody really, I think, talked about them much. They dominated Villanova, outscored them 39-11 on Saturday in 2 games, a doubleheader. And they had a D3 transfer, Jonah Advenchula, who is hitting. He hit 500 with a 1744 OPS out of the leadoff spot, which is pretty crazy. Getting that kind of production from your leadoff
That's
hitter.
exactly what you want out of a leadoff hitter.
Yeah. Um, Old Dominion, Jace. Who was? Do you remember who the big slugger from Old Dominion was last year? There was one guy that he was in like the home run chase all the year
Yeah, he was
last
up there
year.
with Melendez and
Yeah, I can't remember the name, but
let me see if I can find it.
they have a new guy. Oh, not a new guy. He was there last year. Jace Tyser blasted 3 home runs on Sunday. Pretty crazy. He has a 2.644 OPS in the season now. And then last one here, I do want to highlight DBU. New team in the American Conference this year. They went 3-0 to start their season. Friday night man Braxton Bragg went 5 scoreless innings and struck out 12 hitters. He'd struck out 4 in a row twice that outing. So that's pretty dominant on
Yeah.
the mound.
Yeah. Last year, Old Dominion had Matt Courtney and Andy Garriola basically keeping them in the home run race because it goes 27 homers,
That's
25,
right.
and then it very quickly drops down 17, 12, 10. So those two guys last year were keeping them in that home run race. We'll see if they can, because they were keeping up with some of the not that they kept up with Tennessee, but they were
Nobody kept up with
in
Tennessee.
the quick snapshot you looked at online, it was like Tennessee, Wake Forest, Old Dominion. So we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. The only other team I had as a note that played like they want to be ranked, we mentioned a little bit, was Campbell. They really played very well against Rutgers, and the pitching they featured, Cade Kuehler and Chance Tequila looked really legit. They ended up losing the Sunday game. They obviously need to find a quality Sunday starter, but they looked really good. You have any other final thoughts you want to share before I'm going to quickly pull up what we have on the midweek slate? I know off the top of the head, off the old dome piece, ECU and Campbell are playing a midweek game, which should be really good.
Yeah.
But anything
You
else
wanna
you want to share?
you wanna talk about some Warren Nolan ELO RPI stuff real quick?
Hit me, lay it
I,
on
I
me.
got I got some things that I
I'll
want to
I'll
see
check the I'll
what your
check the
opinion is.
midweeks. Okay.
Don't have you looked at the RPI rankings right so far
I'm
through the
I'm
first week?
on I'm on Warren Nolan, but I'm not looking at the
Okay,
the
don't look at it.
metrics. All right.
If you're listening, I want you to think of whatever team you think is leading in RPI. That's not the team that's the number one RPI ranked team right now. It's New
Okay.
Mexico. New Mexico,
Well, didn't they beat?
Wofford, Jackson State, Eastern Kentucky, and Washington State are in the top 25 in RPI rankings right now.
I will say so one of the things I want to work on this year, and I've actually made some progress. I'm going to build instead of like a computerized rankings, I'm going to build a resume comparer, like trying to rank teams based on their like resumes instead of their
Like who they
loss
beat.
record.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the one thing I will say is things are there's a lot of noise and rankings, early on in the
Mm-hmm.
season, but that is pretty wild that, teams that went, because some of those teams, I think New Mexico only won, like, I know they
So
played
they went
Oregon
2-1.
State. They went 2-1. Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah.
So I
It,
think
it
that
is
one
pretty
win kind of
crazy.
carried them. But and then so I got two more things for you. So Kent State, South Alabama Jaguars, and the Texas State Bobcats. All three are predicted on Warren Nolan to have 40 plus win seasons. Do you think any of those happen?
40 is a lot of wins, but okay, who were the first two?
Kent
Kent
State
State.
and South Alabama.
Uh, I can't say that I know enough about either of those two teams to, other than 40 wins is a lot of
The
wins.
I was scrolling through, they have if you go on Warren Nolan, they have the conference predictions and everything. And I saw these teams with just absurd win loss records as their predictions, and those were some of the ones that stood out. Then Texas State, you know, I think they can. Will they?
Yeah.
Probably not. But do they have the talent to? Yeah. And then the biggest one that stood out to me, 45-9 is the predicted win loss for UCLA. If that happens, they're the number one team, right?
Well, it depends on how many other teams are getting 45 plus wins since
I
everybody's
mean, I think if
predicting
you're
it.
only losing 9 games, even if those 9 games are in sweeps to big teams, that's still got to be a top five resume.
Yeah, for sure. But like I said, projections and stuff are like until you really
Yeah,
get like 3 or 4 weeks.
but those were just ones that I saw those and I was like, these are mind blowing right now.
That is
Also,
pretty
fun
crazy.
fact for all of our Evansville faithful out there, they're
Oh,
predicted by the end of the season to have the 24th ranked RPI,
well, there you go. Fair
and
enough.
they have the toughest strength of schedule in the MVC because of their out of conference opponents. Big one being Vanderbilt.
Yeah. Speaking of Evansville, tough weekend series for them, or one of our favorite teams. They did get swept, but go listen to the interview. Eric did a fantastic job interviewing Coach Carroll again. So great to have him back on the show. Hoping we get some more interviews lined up here as we move forward. But otherwise, I think we'll probably come back at you. Maybe if we do a weekend preview episode, not sure based on schedules, but at the very latest, we'll see you after next week again. Anything else, Eric? Anything you want to close with? Final thoughts?
Rake Geloff about to be the UVA home run leader by the end of the
Yeah,
month. I
yeah.
think I think I told somebody on Twitter April 2nd. I think I'm giving him 3 series and 3 midweek matchups to be the UVA home run leader.
So he's got some time at the end of the season to pad his lead. Then.
Oh yeah, he should by the end of the season. His career home run total should be a Barry Bonds type padding. So
All right, we'll be looking forward to Wright and Geloff and all the other awesome college baseball players this year. Midweek's coming up. I didn't really notice a ton of other standout ones. The big one was the ECU Campbell game.
oh, Georgia Tech's got a big one. They play Georgia Southern
Oh,
in
okay.
what
That will
should
be a
be
good one.
the start of the battle for the state of Georgia.
Yeah,
It
that's
was
right.
back and forth last year.
Yeah, that will actually be a good matchup. Alrighty, we'll watch some more baseball this week, and we'll catch you guys later. Thanks for tuning in, and have a good week.